Pyewacket is directed by Adam MacDonald, the director of Backcountry, a film that premiered at TIFF in 2014. This film is also premiering at TIFF this year and tells the story of Leah, a young girl played by Nicole Muñoz, who's dealing with a family tragedy. Her mother, played by Laurie Holden, uproots them and takes them to a new house in the middle of the woods. To escape from her depression and her anxiety, she has delved deep into the occult. And because of this, in a moment of terrible rage, her mom says something awful to her, and she decides, you know what? I'm going to try to conjure something to take care of my mother. And when it actually happens, she regrets every decision she made, and now she has to deal with some unseen entity that's terrorizing her and her mother. I thought MacDonald's last film, Backcountry, was fairly underappreciated. He has a very good knack for taking limited resources and a very small budget and using it to the best of his ability by creating characters and situations that bring forth tension, not just the horror elements of the film. In Backcountry, it was a bear. In this film, it's this witch that is conjured because of this decision that Leah's character makes. Rather than often relying on overt scare horror tactics, which are in this film, and if you are a horror buff, especially an indie horror buff, you're going to get that, this film relies on tension built through the mother-daughter relationship that's crumbling to the ground. If you were to take all of the horror elements out of Pyewacket, you would still have a fairly compelling drama about a mother and a daughter dealing with a tragedy, which is one of the reasons why the film worked for me. The characters are well fleshed out. The characters are set up in compelling ways that makes you actually care when things start to go down the horror path. He also has a really great way of taking what is normally used as a moment to heighten the tension by setting up some great scare, like you pan up something's leg and then, oh my god, there it is, or the music lets you know that something really horrible is about to happen. Rather than doing that, MacDonald often just cuts to something and presents it to you in a wide shot and says, here's this, look at it. Sometimes the scariest elements of film are things that appear in the background of shots. Things that maybe you don't notice at first, or perhaps are on the screen for a long period of time before your eye looks over to the corner and realizes that there's something terrifying in the image. That happens during Pyewacket. About 30 minutes through, there's a wide shot of a forest, and our main character Leah is standing in the foreground. But if you look in the background, you can tell that there is something standing behind a tree. And when I noticed that, it just unsettled me, and it gave me goosebumps across my entire body. This movie uses minimal effects and a limited amount of resources to build tension through sound design, performances, and effective camera work. MacDonald utilizes handheld shots to intensify the atmosphere, and where normally this guerrilla-style filmmaking can sometimes cheapen the look of a film, here it created a fly-on-the-wall type feeling where you felt like you were observing characters going through something horrific rather than being told every single beat through horror moments and musical cues that we're used to experiencing. There's a sense of voyeurism also, because oftentimes he will have long Steadicam shots of the point of view of Pyewacket, or maybe he used a Ronin, I don't know. And he's going through the woods and trees are passing, and you realize that you are seeing whatever the witch is seeing at this point. And that voyeuristic take on it also made me feel unsettled. There's one particular shot where the camera hovers over someone sleeping, and I just kept imagining what it would be like if I opened my eyes and saw whatever this thing looks like. Which is something else I liked about Pyewacket, is that he often keeps this thing hidden. You don't really see it too often. Which brings me into one of my flaws. When you do see Pyewacket, it sometimes does drain the tension because this is a very low-budget film. There's a great wide shot towards the very end of the movie that was very, very creepy. But there's a sequence in the middle where it kind of appears as this form that I felt drained the tension from the moment, and the effect wasn't as strong as it should have been. There's also a scene about halfway through in the woods with two characters that I thought was really effective, and it was actually really starting to creep me out. It gave me a very Blair Witch type feel. But then it ends up being a joke, and I was like, come on, like that to me, that was just a little bit of a cop-out. I also felt that the ending was a bit rushed. While I was able to make sense of what occurs, it felt like we needed an extra 10 minutes with the characters to breathe about what happens. But at the same time, it's also really important to end a horror film at the height of drama, at the height of fear, at that big moment, and not really necessarily give you that release that some other films do, similar to what Blair Witch did. It just cuts out and you're like, okay, let me take a breath and kind of think about what just happened. So I can also praise the film for having an ending like that. But It just felt like I could have used maybe 5 or 10 more minutes of character scenes. But I feel like maybe on second viewing that won't be an issue so much, now that I was able to really think about what occurs in the film, because it's the type of ending, and of course I won't give it away, that is a little ambiguous. All of the pieces of the puzzle are there, you just have to think about it and put it together. The film doesn't present you a completed puzzle on a platter and says, here, feel good about this ending. It forces you to think about it and asks you to figure out how certain events could have happened. With limited knowledge of what happens, it puts you in Leah's shoes and makes you try to figure out how these things occurred. For some people that might be really maddening, but I like when films force you to think, especially an indie horror film. And I have a lot of respect for indie horror filmmakers, because I know what it's like to try to make a movie with very limited resources and a very small budget. And oftentimes horror filmmakers, because I've seen it, they try to just have a bunch of blood or a bunch of, girls running around half naked or other things that they think they have to put in their film to make up for the lack of a budget. Adam MacDonald clearly doesn't feel that way. He chooses to rely on character moments, things that don't cost a lot of money to film, to boost the strength of the horror elements. And that's something that MacDonald has done really well here. The overall theme of the film seems to be that you are your own worst enemy. Sometimes what we think we need in life and how we struggle to obtain it ultimately becomes our downfall. And I like that this tiny indie horror film has a hidden meaning like that. It makes you ask questions. It makes you think about what would you do in this situation. And it gives us compelling lead characters. Laurie Holden is really good as the mother, and Nicole Muñoz is also excellent. Without their good performances and some of the smaller scenes between the two, the horror wouldn't work as well. Yes, at times it does feel like a very small movie without a big budget, and sometimes maybe a few extra $1,000s would have helped with a few of the effects. But I appreciated the restraint. This is a very uncommon trait in horror filmmakers, restraint. When you have things at your disposal, sometimes you really want to show it. You really want to utilize it, but the best horror films don't. I'm going to give it a B+. So I hear that a viewer of mine named Jack Fern had his 24th birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, buddy. I also hear that he is in the path of Hurricane Irma. I really hope you're safe and that you're staying secure and that everything works out for you, buddy. Thanks for watching. Guys, thank you so much as always, and if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.